Jon Rothstein's latest 45 has UCLA hovering around the top 25. But what's more interesting, Max, is who he has coming back to UCLA. Who could that be? Let's talk about it on Locked On UCLA.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody. This is the Locked On UCLA podcast. Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer alongside Max Kelton. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. So like, comment, and subscribe over there. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can make every moment more. Just don't miss out on the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 back in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. If you're an everyday listener, thanks for tuning in. We had a big weekend of UCLA sports, but we're talking UCLA hoops because Rothstein, good old Max, Rothstein, as you pointed out to me, has two guys coming back in his mind. Who are those two guys?
It looks like he has Adem Bona and Jaylen Clark returning on his top 45 heading into next year. He still has Clark coming off the bench, injured for the start of the season, but he also has Adem Bona starting at center. And, this is something to pay attention to, both of them declaring for the draft, haven't been injured, not really being able to work out for NBA teams, also maintaining that eligibility. And it's something that we talked about when they declared. It didn't really make sense to us, and I guess it doesn't really make sense to him. So we'll see if they return, but Jon Rothstein is certainly pretty confident that they will.
You know what's interesting, Max? So he has Bona as a starting center, then Clark. You know who's not in that lineup? Of course, he's not on the team, and I don't really know what his projections look like. No Adem Bona on the roster. Of course, maybe he's waiting till someone signs, but he has nobody. He does not have Mara on that roster, which is interesting for UCLA. So we just wonder what that situation is playing out like right now. But to have Bona coming back, and the labrum will take a little less recovery time than the injury for Jaylen Clark, his lower leg injury, as it was called for so long. But if UCLA gets those two guys back, as Rothstein has them as a 25 team, I think they're a top 15 team with those guys at their ceiling.
I think they're on the cusp. They're on the cusp right there, right? Bona is the Pac-12 freshman of the year, so with him returning, he'll certainly take a step forward on his offensive game. He was such an efficient scorer, near 70% on field goals this season. But they will play small, right? They're playing four guards. With Feeble, it looks like roughly around the 3 or 4, which is surprising to me. But Dylan Andrews and Sebastian Mack are projected to start alongside each other in this backcourt. So I'm curious as to see what that looks like and if these projections will hold chalk, At this point, it's all speculation because you really don't know how that draft is going to go. If Jaylen Clark is taken in the first round, I don't see him coming back. Similar story with Adem Bona, right? And they both have the talent to be taken in that first round, but they really just can't work out for NBA teams. So curious as to see what that draft holds. But right now, hey, this is not worst case scenario territory. It's actually very promising if the lineup were to return two of the Pac-12's greatest stars last year.
Yeah, I was looking up quickly, Max, that I didn't see any news that switched about Mara, but it is intriguing that Rothstein has not put him on a projected bench or starting, but until he's officially on the roster, all these guys can be Bruins, whether they maintain eligibility or not, because the portal window is closed. Mara is not officially a Bruin, despite all our talk and all the indications pointing to him being on UCLA's roster. What's interesting is you look across the top 25, I guess depending on the day you look at it, you have Colorado ahead of UCLA, you have Arizona just ahead of UCLA, and then way at the top in the Pac-12 with Bronny James and Isaiah Collier, you have USC expected to be a top 10 team next year, which makes UCLA potentially a preseason number 4 in their final year in the Pac-12.
Yeah, it's also USC's final year in the Pac-12, and they are gearing up for a pretty apparent shift heading into this final season. You got to imagine Bronny is looking for a one-and-done season, and they're looking for their final Pac-12 title and their final opportunity to obtain such. So, Hey, they're crosstown rivals for a reason, and it's up to the Bruins and Mick Cronin to try and knock Bronny down a peg. And that's something that you kind of would love to see. So I'd love to see, a couple of those guys return. I think Adem Bona is going to be such a big addition for this team if he does return. But that said, it's a young team. It's a different look, it's a different group of leaders on the floor. So I would be excited to see how they compete in the Pac-12. You have Stefanovic, who was already in the Pac-12 with Utah, who comes over. He knows what the landscape looks like. Curious as to see how this team meshes and what Mick Cronin can puzzle together, with such a new group.
If UCLA can compete, I think that just speaks volumes about Mick Cronin's qualifications as UCLA head coach. There's a lot of unknown, even into the early month of May, with so many guys going into the NBA draft declaration stage of their careers. And while we may expect both Bona and Clark, according to this Rothstein projection, that doesn't mean someone's going to take a flyer on one of these two guys at the end of the first round, or even say early second round. And I think if one of those guys is picked early second round, first or second pick, I'm not sure why they wouldn't go either. But, we'll see. There's nothing like being a first round NBA draft pick. It's almost, hey, especially for somebody who's hurt, automatic, go and try it out, take the NBA training route. But, we talked about Bona's he's got to expand his offensive game. Clark, not really sure there's much to expand by another year in college other than show that he's healthy.
You're right. If Clark can come out of one more season showing that he's healthy, proving that he's healthy, and providing similar production on both the offensive and defensive sides of the ball, he has the potential to be a lottery pick. I really believe that. I think Bona also can improve his draft stock if he can improve a little bit on the offensive side of the ball. These are two guys with some serious talent who right now are cusping the first round while injured. So it makes sense for them to return. I think, I've read mock drafts where Jaylen Clark is midway through the second or late in the second round. And frankly, he can improve that stock, and being drafted higher up really improves, your potential in the league and where you start. So it makes sense for them to return. I think we've been talking about it since they both declared for the draft, that it was a little curious why they did it. And, Jon Rothstein seems to agree with us. So we'll see where that heads. When is the draft, Zach? Are you familiar?
Off the top of my head, no. I'm too worried about my favorite hockey team winning a ping pong draft tonight. So I haven't paid attention. I'm too busy worrying about my favorite NBA team who is in the playoffs. So I haven't cared about the draft in terms of knowing the day. It's June 22nd in New York, though, this year in Barclays. So that is something to keep note. June 22nd, 77th edition of the NBA draft. Not that we don't care about it, but, unless June 22nd is not going to mean much, because by the time, I believe it's the end of May that they have to decide whether to withdraw or not. So when the actual draft is, it doesn't really matter. It's how do you project into, all right, am I going to be a mid-second rounder? Then you maybe want to come back. Are you going to try and test the waters and see what happens? Then are you a first rounder? Then you really did a good thing. Or did Juzang go undrafted? Well, he made the NBA squad this year with the Jazz. So how do you test those things? Do you project to be that mid-second rounder, as you mentioned? Or if you're a first rounder, you're going to stay in the draft. If not, then you're going to come back and try and grow that stock and prove you're healthy in 2024 for next year's draft.
And think about it this way too. Amari Bailey is not projected to come back, right? He's healthy. He provided some really good scoring toward the end of the year. In Jaylen Clark's absence, I think he stepped up his defensive game. He's projected to go in this draft, and so that gives you an idea of what a healthy player will project, right? Versus a couple of injured guys who might have even had some better numbers and better production than Bailey, especially during the regular season. So a different story, and frankly, it makes sense for them to return. But I guess we'll see at the end of May.
We'll see at the end of May, and the big thing is if they do come back, all right, expectations are a little different than we might be thinking at this current moment, because UCLA, they're top 25, maybe top 20, top 15 team with these guys back when Clark hopefully is fully healthy, if that happens, and when it comes to him returning. And then if Adem Bona comes back, well, if you have the conference freshman player of the year returning, it's generally not a bad thing. In the meantime, if you're a betting man, you might want to head on over to FanDuel because, hey, it was pretty easy money if you put all your money, Max, on UCLA's men's volleyball team overall, because, hey, it just seemed clear and easy they're going to win. We're going to talk about that in a moment. But if you're making a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs, then you got to head right now to go get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 back if you're a new customer, because $1,000 back in bonus bets happen if your first bet doesn't win. You can go get on a safe and secure app. You get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet on all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. Get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 back. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA, and with us here at Locked On. Cruising on into segment 2 of Locked On UCLA, Max and Zach going at it. Hey, the Bruins had 2 opportunities to win national championships over the weekend. One went according to plan. The other one, not so much. We're going to start with the happy news first, because as much as we talk about bad news, we're starting with the happy news. A championship number 20 for UCLA's men's volleyball program. What did you like? What didn't you like as the Bruins took down the Rainbow Warriors in 4?
I think a lot of folks coming into it really expected Merrick McHenry to be the name that everybody was talking about at the end of the day. But I was really impressed with a couple of role players on this team. Alex Knight had a really good game, 15 kills. I think maybe the best game of his career. J.R. Norris came in, and then he didn't start, but he provided some terrific minutes in the middle as well. Andrew Rowan, I think, and they were talking about it on the broadcast, is the heir apparent for the USA men's volleyball setter position. And that kid can just dot the ball left and right. A freshman who came in, he's the MPSF, freshman of the year, and a guy who came here following the MPSF player of the year in the same position. The fact that Miles Partain started this year after last season being the MPSF player of the year, the conference player of the year, left early on in the season after a loss to Penn State, who ultimately finished its year in the semifinal. Andrew Rowan stepped in, provided the same production, frankly, maybe even better production. You can't say enough about that kid's work ethic, about his potential moving forward, and about how this team clicked toward the end. Guy Guinness with a tremendous evening. He had such a heavy hand, and I think it was a season high in kills for him. Overall, really good win against what I thought was, other than UCLA, the best team in the country in Hawaii. But, they needed to close it out because Hawaii is really good in 5 setters, and UCLA was able to finish it in 4. Really sharp finish for the Bruins, who, it came down to a late challenge on the last point and still able to knock it off. So congratulations to that UCLA men's volleyball team. I think that's championship 121 for all Bruins and number 20 for the Bruins on the men's volleyball side. I don't think any other program has more than 5 in men's volleyball. So by far and away, the best program in the country.
It was the first championship for the UCLA men's volleyball program since 2006. It's been way too long. They talked about the journey for 20. They talked about all the recent heartbreaks, some against Long Beach, sometimes the team just falling a little bit short. Twice at Pauley Pavilion, they've been heartbroken in 5 sets to Long Beach State. Exacted that revenge, beat Hawaii in the final, and the Bows were excited. UCLA choked that second set away. We have to talk about that, Max. They choked that second set away up 19-13, and the Bulls went on a ridiculous run, only to see UCLA close it out in sets 3 and 4. And Hawaii, I think, was up a little bit early in that third set, only for UCLA to take control, assert their dominance. And I felt, despite a good traveling fan base for Hawaii, it's not the same when you go play them at their place in the Stan Sheriff Center. And UCLA was game planned well. Andrew Rowan, it's deeper in his season. They said he was the first freshman to win a national championship as a starter, I think, since the early 1990s. That just doesn't happen in the sport of men's volleyball. You normally need someone to know what they're doing deeper in their career, and that's when you win your back-to-back championships.
And the defense was on full display too. I mean, you got to give credit to Troy Gooch, who was terrific, and frankly, Brett Stewart for Hawaii, who was really great. But a guy like Chaz Galloway for that Hawaii team, the Bruins had his number. He had struggled on the defensive side of the ball all NCAA tournament. They attacked him. He had 4 reception errors, and the Bruins had 10 service aces. J.R. Norris the fourth, a guy who did not start, 8 kills on 11 attempts. He was swinging at 727. He had five aces, maybe the best game of his career. And frankly, I think that it was just a very impressive performance. That second set where Hawaii won 33-31, they had to fight for it. This is a team that was number 1 all season long in the national polls. They had to fight for one win, one set win. And UCLA, well, they had that 19-13 lead. They also staved off 5 set points in that set. So, this is just all around a tremendous, tremendous victory for the Bruins, but it felt like they were in the driver's seat the entire time. 60 assists for Andrew Rowan. He doesn't play like a freshman. He is just such a poised young man, and there's so much to look forward to, and it looks like almost everybody's returning for this team too, which just means, hey, they're looking to run it back the same way Hawaii did 2 years ago.
Hey, that's what I was going to ask you. Does this team look like they have it when it comes to who's going to win the overall championship? Let's take you over the last decade of what men's volleyballs look like, all right? Hawaii in 21 and 22, they won back-to-back. Long Beach in 18-19 before the pandemic, they went back-to-back. Ohio State in 16-17, you're getting the trend here, Max, went back-to-back. Loyola Chicago, 14-15, the Ramblers, back-to-back. Dating back to UC Irvine in 2012 and 2013 going back-to-back. Heck, hey, remember, John Speraw was the author of many of those early UC Irvine championships way back when he last won back in the 06-07 era with the Eaters. They have 4 to 5 championships. So over the last, say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 champions before UCLA, they've all gone back-to-back. In men's volleyball, you win one, you're probably getting 2. And the Bruins, who have largely dominated this sport since the 1970s, what's the likelihood that next year in Long Beach at the Pyramid, they're celebrating in SoCal?
Well, it's a difficult place to play. A lot of folks think that the Stan Sheriff Center is the most difficult place to play in volleyball. I think Long Beach and BYU are right up there. More difficult than Poly, in my opinion. So, hey, it's not easy, and there's a lot of twists and turns to get there. But I think that this team has all of the right pieces, and if Andrew Rowan is at the controls, I believe that he can lead them to another championship with the group that they have. They came out this year, and I saw them first weekend, and it seemed like even their second unit could have a shot at a title because they're that talented. And while Hawaii was ranked number 1 all season and coming off of back-to-back championships, no team had won 3 in a row since the Bruins did it. And I think it was the 80s, could have been in the 90s, but it's been over 30 years since a team has gone three-peat. So I think that this UCLA team has all of the fixings to go back-to-back because we've seen that trend. Really good squad, young team that knows how to play with each other, has developed a lot of chemistry. But every team is going to be gunning for the Bruins. When you win a championship, you put a bounty on your head. So Jon Speraw will certainly have to work in a new game plan. And I think that, again, if everybody returns and chalk holds, this Bruin team will be number 1 heading into next year and moving forward. But they're in one of the best conferences in the country. So frankly, anything could happen.
Yeah, nobody's three-peated since the Bruins won 4 in a row from 1981 to 1984. They dominated in the early to mid-'80s. So the Bruins 121 national championship. We expected it, kind of. Maybe a little more fight we thought from Hawaii. But the Bruins, national champions. Let's go. On the other side, still on the volleyball front, in the sands, on the beach, in Gulf Shores, we're going to cruise on into segment 3 of Locked On UCLA. Max, the disappointment on Sunday morning, despite all the weather, everything going well for the Bruins at the end of the year. It seems storybook. You get to take on your bitter rival who you've dominated at the end of the year in the Pac-12 tournament a week before, in regular season matchups ever since dropping the first one. But they fell to USC in the final, heartbreakingly, 3-2, as 2 of the 5 pairings ended up going the full 3 sets. Max, what are your thoughts about how this UCLA volleyball team on the beach side finished 40-4, only to fall heartbreakingly short in the final against their bitter rivals.
Well, it seemed like UCLA really had USC's number during the regular season, right? Wins during the Pac-12 tournament and just prior. So I think a lot of folks went in thinking that the Bruins were just going to keep that rolling, but it's really hard to beat a great team once. It's incredibly hard to beat a great team twice. And beating a great team three times is just
Well, it'd be the fourth time
it,
because they already beat him 3 times in a row.
sure. So, it's so much harder as you move on, and teams just recognize how you play. The matchups are similar. So it was a difficult matchup coming in. And frankly, this was where we had talked about how UCLA could get a hiccup here because they're playing against either USC or TCU, and this is a USC team that beat TCU on the way. So, the Bruins fell behind 0-2, came back to tie it 2-2, and then on I think it was the third court lost it 15-11. Haley Halgren, Riley Powers, they had as much fight in them as anybody could, but this is a really good USC team that had really held a top 2-3 spot all season long. And frankly, they run this tournament. This tournament really runs through the Trojans, and the Bruins tried to give them a taste of their own medicine, just couldn't pull it out.
And unfortunately, USC has now dominated the last few years. UCLA has not won one since going back-to-back before the pandemic. They fought valiantly. 3 of the pairings lost the first sets. 2 of those pairings that lost the first sets, the 2s and the 3s, won their second set. Exciting, especially the 2s between Abby Van Winkle and Perry Brennan were able to fight their way into a third. But in the end, it was 2 3-set wins for USC. If you remember, first 2 sets up to 21, win by 2. The third set to 15, win by 2. And the frustration in Gulf Shores. We talked about it. UCLA had an easier path to get to the final. SC had a much tougher draw. And unfortunately, UCLA wasn't up to the task. And maybe they would have fared better not playing your bitter rival for the 5th time. SC's only wins this year came in the when with it going the full 5 matches, expansive. That was in the beginning. And unfortunately, sandwiched in between all those were the UCLA wins, and you didn't get the most important. But that just shows you how good the Pac-12 was at volleyball, how good the West Coast is. The championship hasn't been won by anybody other than UCLA or USC in its infant stage of this tournament growing and expanding. This was the first time it had the single elimination feel to it. I thought the tournament went well, despite some weather hiccups, other than UCLA losing. I think this is a great tournament going forward, as it's obviously been growing. It always has a fun little vibe the first weekend of May. Yet here UCLA is having a lot of fun. And Max, I was banking on 2. I wanted 2.
You have the opportunity to earn another one with softball. I mean, that team is they've been cruising toward the end of the season. I wouldn't say the same about the baseball team, I'll tell you that much. But you could talk about Abby Van Winkle, who ends her career as the Bruins career win leader. 128 wins for Van Winkle. She fell just shy on court 2 with a 3-set loss against a couple of USC's best. And then Lexi Denneberg, she had her 100th career win on the day on court 1. But just a tough loss for the Bruins, who tie the NCAA single season win total, which the Bruins had previously set back in 2018 during the championship season. So again, definitely not a year to scoff at, but disappointing considering that they had title hopes and just couldn't finish it off in the final match of the season.
Disappointing considering who they lost to. And it's the one program, there's some, the joke in different sports, you're competing against that program. Everybody in the country is competing against these 2 programs, USC and UCLA. And to try and make that national championship total a little closer, the Bruins could have had 2 in less than a 24-hour span. Fortunately, they get 1. In men's volleyball, we thought would be on the right roll. And I was extremely confident in the beach volleyball program, but they had a great season. It doesn't take away from their 40 wins, and yet, it is what it is. That's just sometimes you win some and you lose some, and we'll find out what the next chapter is. Maybe they'll win, we'll see how it goes. Only good for the sport of beach volleyball to see 2 rivals going at it in the final to the very last couple of points. Speaking of softball, they're on a roll. Pac-12 tournament coming up. We'll talk about that, coming up on the Locked On UCLA episode. Baseball, I've got to yell at the baseball team because that was just absolutely atrocious what happened at home this weekend. And more basketball news. Maybe someone will withdraw within the week. Football, everything in between, spring practice done. We've got all the good stuff here on Locked On UCLA. Thanks for tuning in. For Max Kelton, I'm Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. UCLA has another national championship, everybody. We need to have an 8 clap. Despite maybe the disappointment of Sunday morning, we have to relish in the victory that was Saturday evening. Hands up, UCLA fans. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA. UCLA. Fight, fight, fights. This has been Locked On UCLA. Hit that subscribe button. Download on the audio versions. Thanks for tuning in. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer signing off. Go Bruins.